What if I told you the loudest headline in Cleveland wasn't about a blockbuster trade or a locker room mutiny? It was about choosing to stay. Picture Myles Garrett, ferocious off the edge, a man who makes quarterbacks move like they heard a bad joke, standing at a crossroads that could have rewritten the Browns' story in an instant. Instead, the answer they gave him was almost boringly brave. You're staying. You remember the theater of the first ask. Garrett went public with a trade request in the offseason, and for a hot minute, it felt inevitable. He was the top of the mountain. Number one pick, DPOY, a highlight reel that fed highlight reels, and yet he stepped back and said, I want out. The presses spun. Twitter filled up with offers that teams would have killed to make. You could smell draft picks in the air, maybe 3 first-rounders, and a shiny future. It's the kind of fantasy that keeps GMs up at night and keeps fans dreaming of the rebuild lottery. But life doesn't always play out like a trade rumor. Fate and patience took the wheel. By March, Garrett re-signed. 4 years, $160 million, a commitment that put the city's heartbeat back where it belonged. The headlines smiled. The locker room exhaled. It was a handshake that read, I'll be here. We'll build together. Fast forward to a 2-6 start this season, and the old itch returned. Garrett's frustration read like punctuation on every bad snap and every blown coverage. Folks began whispering again. Will Cleveland finally pull the trigger? Then quietly the narrative went public and flatlined. Dianna Russini reports this. Garrett's not going anywhere. Teams checked in. People looked. And Cleveland, they decided to keep their man. He's a Brown and will remain a Brown, someone texted. Simple. Boring on paper, nuclear in its implications. But there's a beauty to that boredom if you look close. The decision to keep a superstar who asks for a trade isn't a neutral move. It's a vote of confidence and hubris tangled together. Ask yourself, why not trade him? The Browns could have reset their timeline, stockpiled picks, and started the rebuild with a vault full of draft capital. They could have traded Garrett and, in the most cold-blooded way, re-rolled the dice. Instead, they chose continuity over cashing in. There are reasons. Garrett's production remains elite. 31 tackles, 10 sacks, and a 5-sack onslaught in a loss that somehow still read like his personal highlight film. He's the kind of player who changes schemes and forces coordinators to call different plays. You don't replace that easily. Teams drool over players like him because true pass rushers are rare currency. You could build a team around picks. Sometimes that works. But you could also build a team around a transcendent talent and hope younger pieces rise faster than the calendar ages your superstar. But let's be honest, this is also the Browns admitting something about their identity. They're not selling today. They're not trading their anchor for future promise. They'd rather try to build a championship-capable roster around Garrett than liquidate his value. That's a narrative gamble, betting that fixing around him is faster than replacing him. It's the premium version of let's double down. It says they still believe the path to contention runs through him, not away from him. There's another layer here, the human one. Myles Garrett is not a chess piece. He's a person with pride, with a legacy, and with a timeline. He's turning 30 in December. That's not ancient, but neither is it the start of a rookie arc. The Browns might have stacked picks and waited, but the risk was clear. What if Garrett's prime slides by while you wait for a developmental curve? What if you trade him and he becomes another team's playoff engine? Hindsight is brutal that way. Keep him, and you have a chance to compete in his prime. Trade him, and you gamble on drafts and patience you might not actually have. And then there's the optics inside the building. Garrett's visible frustration, brow-furrowed exasperations at blown assignments, the occasional body language moment, could have corroded a locker room if the team chose to break the band. Retaining him sends a message to teammates. We're not panicking. We're not surrendering. It's a call to arms more than a quiet pact. It can either galvanize a group that sees leadership staying through thick and thin, or it can plant a seed of discomfort for young players who wanted a clearer timeline of change. Think of the mechanics, too. Moving a guy like Garrett isn't mainly about trading one superstar for picks. It's about changing everything. Protection schemes, edge responsibilities, cap structure, culture. The Browns clearly decided the disruption of trading him would be worse than the disruption of staying the course. They accepted the immediate pain of a losing record in exchange for the intangible stability Garrett gives: dressing room authority, weekly matchups that demand respect, and the kind of highlight that draws fans to the stadium even when the standings sting. But the choice isn't only strategic, it's emotional theater for the city. Cleveland, a place that wrings hope out of hard times, had a storyline that was almost too tempting. Trade Garrett, rebuild, reset expectations. Instead, the franchise delivered something more old-fashioned: loyalty in a sport that spins loyalty into trade chips every offseason. There's a certain romance to keeping your best player, and that romance buys the Browns a kind of goodwill that spreadsheets can't measure. Still, let's not dress this up as unambiguous wisdom. The danger of keeping Garrett is obvious. If the Browns don't get better, he ages on their roster. If injuries or regression hit, that beautiful $160 million ink suddenly looks like an albatross. Fans will rage about missed opportunities and what-if scenarios. Executives will whisper about the chance cost of not converting him into picks and prospects. Football is a cruel ledger. You are judged by outcomes, not intentions. The Browns have chosen an intention that requires results to look smart. So what's the pressure valve here? It's simple: performance. Garrett hasn't suddenly become mortal. He's still ripping sacks and making plays, which buys everyone time. But the team must accelerate development around him. Young players need to step up. The offense needs to produce. The front office must draft and sign complementary pieces that translate elite edge pressure into wins. Retaining Garrett is step one. Turning that into postseason runs is the part that will separate leadership from wishful thinking. There's also an unignorably human subplot. Imagine Garrett on a cold December night, helmet tucked under his arm, glancing at the city skyline that wrote his name across local sports lore. He decides in March to stay with a handshake and a dollar sign. He signs and plays, and now every loss is a personal dent in a contract that promised legacy. That's a lot to carry. But maybe that pressure is what fuels him. The knowledge that he's not a commodity, but a cornerstone, and that his choices matter to more than cap sheets. If you listen closely to this decision, you hear something like an old school pledge: we will build here, together, even if it's messy. It's an admission that winning often takes time, and sometimes you don't collect magical picks for quarterbacking patience. It's messy, sure. It's dangerous, sure. But it's also honest. So where does this leave Cleveland? For now, it leaves us with a player who remains in orange and brown, a city that keeps its star, and a front office that chose continuity over the nuclear option. It's a bet that they can cobble a contender around a transcendent talent before the calendar makes that talent more fragile. It's a bet that says we'd rather try and fail together than cash out and hope the market is kind. There's poetry in that risk, awkward and headline-resistant though it may be. The ultimate test is simple and unforgiving: wins. If the Browns start stacking them, this decision will look prescient. If they don't, it will look inevitable in hindsight that they should have traded him when the offer was rich. Either way, the story's best line isn't a trade headline. It's the image of Garrett roaring on a fourth-quarter sack, the stadium shaking, because he chose to stay and fight for something that hasn't yet fully arrived. In sports, the most honest decisions are rarely neat. Cleveland kept its loudest instrument and gave itself a chance to compose the rest of the orchestra. Whether that symphony becomes a playoff march or an elegy depends on how fast everyone else learns to play along. The man at the edge didn't leave. Now the city waits to see if keeping him was a love letter or a last chance. You could feel the rumor mill spin itself into a story: a superstar who once asked to be traded, a franchise stuck in a slump, and a deadline that always feels like it could rearrange the league overnight. Then, amid phone calls, whispers, and hypothetical packages, the Browns quietly closed the door. Myles Garrett isn't getting moved. Period. Reuters. That's the headline everyone should bookmark because it matters in three big ways. First, Garrett's not just a high-impact player. He's under a new massive deal that makes moving him complicated. He signed a 4-year extension in March that keeps him in Cleveland through 2030. And any team that wanted him would have to absorb that contract and the realities that come with it. The financial and roster math isn't trivial, and that's part of why the Browns pushed back against the trade chatter. ESPN.com. The production is real. Garrett has been doing the work on the field. Sacks, pressures, wrecking a game plan or two on any given Sunday. Through 8 games this season, he's piled up numbers that scream elite. Double-digit sacks and that jaw-dropping 5-sack performance that turned heads even in a loss. When a player is still producing at this level, the cost-benefit of trading him for picks or prospects suddenly looks much thinner. Teams can dream of a return haul, but what you're giving up in the moment is a force that changes blocking schemes and game scripts every week. ProFootballReference.com. Third, the optics of loyalty versus short-term salvage. Garrett's public trade request earlier in the year was headline fodder. He said he wanted to win, and he said he'd consider leaving if the Browns couldn't produce. That stung. Then the Browns and Garrett did the most NFL thing possible. They negotiated, patched the rift with a franchise record extension, and signed him to a deal that essentially put the league on notice. Now, amid a bad start for Cleveland, teams checked in. But both from a practical and a messy cultural angle, Cleveland decided the path forward was to keep its best player and try to fix the rest around him. That's a statement about institutional patience as much as it is about roster strategy. Reuters. Let's be honest. That doesn't make the decision risk-free. Garrett turns 30 in December. Edge rushers eat blocks and wear down. Their peak windows can be merciless and short. If you're the Browns, you have to ask, does staying with Garrett increase your odds of contending fast enough that his prime matters, or do you flip him for a haul and rebuild a longer runway? The answer depends on how confident you are in the coaches, the draft board, and the front office's ability to sculpt the supporting cast. Right now, Cleveland's bet is on continuity. Keep the star, try to fix the perimeter. ProFootballReference.com. There's also the human element. Garrett's trade request in February was raw and public. It was a guy saying he wanted to play for a team built to win now. Then in March, he re-signed. Attention every franchise would rather not have under the spotlight. Keeping him now is partly about honoring that new contract and partly about the intangible value he brings to a locker room, power, leadership, and the kind of single-player disruption that changes how opponents prepare. If your identity is we win by pressuring the QB, you don't let your primary pressure generator walk out the door without a very, very good reason. ClevelandBrowns.com. From a trade market perspective, the chatter made sense. Garrett checks all the boxes that contenders want. Elite pass rush, proven consistency, double-digit sacks season after season, and a resume that includes Pro Bowls and Defensive Player of the Year hardware. Theoretically, the Browns could have fetched multiple first-round picks. Practically, giving up that kind of difference maker in a league where pressure is scarce is a heavy cost, and you have to trust development and draft view to turn picks into ready-made pieces on a timeline that matters. That's a gamble owners and GMs rarely make unless they've already decided their current window is closed. ProFootballReference.com. So, what should fans and neutral observers read into this? First, patience from the front office. At least for now. Cleveland's messaging is simple. Garrett is a Brown. Second, the team still needs answers. One player can tilt games, but he can't fix an entire roster. Line play, quarterback play, scheme fit. Those are the gaps that actually determine whether keeping Garrett pays off. Third, the deadline drama is over for this one, but it's a reminder that extensions can function as both a truce and a leash. You get the star locked in, but you also buy a season or two to see if infrastructure improves around him. Reuters, now the fun and the pressure part. How Cleveland turns this into progress. If you're Andrew Berry in the front office, you've got a narrow playbook. Trade shrewdly for complementary pieces, maximize draft capital around the trenches, and get creative in free agency to surround Garrett with help. If you do those things, Garrett stays a franchise centerpiece, and the team can chase relevance while the pass rush terrorizes opponents. If you don't, you've locked yourself into a future where a Hall of Fame level player ages without a team built to capitalize on his greatness. Those are high-stakes chess moves, not checkers. Reuters finally, let's speak to the narrative. Sports love closure, but here we get something grittier. A franchise choosing continuity over reset, a superstar staying put after demanding a trade, and a front office implicitly promising to build around him rather than cash him in. It's satisfying in one way, stars stay, and unnerving in another. If change doesn't come, regrets compound. Either way, Garrett's decision to remain in Cleveland and the Browns' decision to keep him rewrote the script for their season. Now the hard part begins, turning that decision into wins. Reuters. Closing image, picture Garrett, helmet in hand, walking into practice with the same intensity he's always had. Opponents scheming to slow him, teammates energized by his presence, and a front office quietly trying to assemble the rest of the orchestra. The headline tonight is simple. Myles Garrett stays a Brown. The subplot is far more complicated. Can Cleveland use that anchor to build something that lasts? Time and the next few roster moves will tell. Reuters.